Well, Saturday, um, we got to talk about it, but given how it ended, trust me, the two of us here at Hoist the Colors, we really wish we couldn't, but we got to. I mean, this is the this was the final non-conference tune-up before Big East play starts tonight for your Seton Hall Pirates on Peacock at Villanova at the Finn, which we'll talk about more. Has become a house of horrors for the team over the last 30 years, I believe. But anyways, welcome in to this week's edition. I'm Tim Best. He's Pat Madden. Well, at Jersey Mike's Arena, for the first 25 to 30 minutes, we were playing. I mean, I'm going to use a horrible joke here, but we were playing a sub above Rutgers. Like, we were playing really well. Chauncey Jenkins had that nasty poster dunk. I mean, right on his head, as the social media guru for Seton Hall basketball put that out on social media. And then Rutgers just crept into it, back into the game with Dylan Harper and Ace Bailey, the two prime suspects that we were expecting to go off. They were leading the comeback, and that crowd started to get back into the game. Seton Hall started to crumble. They handled it well enough that they got themselves into a position to tie it up thanks to some missed free throws in the final 6 seconds of the game. But unfortunately, Dylan Harper made a Dylan Harper play, a play that you expect a star freshman to make, making a three at the buzzer to sink the Pirate ship and to give Rutgers their first pair of consecutive Garden State Hardwood Classic victories since the trophy was introduced 10 years ago. Pat, I mean, just overall takeaways from, just the entire scope of the game. There was a lot of bad, which included starting the game 2 for 9 from the charity stripe and allowing the comeback, but still plenty of positives to take from it too, even though the loss came in such heartbreaking fashion.
Well, I mean, Seton Hall played the type of game they had to play to beat a team like Rutgers. Early on, Harper had all sorts of issues bringing the ball up. Garway Duel wouldn't let the Rutgers offense operate. Then they make a few adjustments. The offense performed a lot better, let's say, after the first 10 minutes of the game. And then you get to, that then Harper and Bailey just make plays. I mean, you're talking about two guys who are going to be in the top 10 of the NBA draft as things stand right now. And Seton Hall forced Rutgers to hit a 30-footer to beat us. I don't know if that speaks to where Rutgers is. That's a debate we can have for a different time. That's their problem. On the other hand, I think it means that Seton Hall shows at least they can be competitive in tough road games like this. As we're about to enter Big East play, particularly tonight, and we'll talk about that in a couple of minutes. This team showed it can handle hostile environments. There's still a lot of veteran experience on this team, even if to a certain extent of this is the type of thing where all the stuff that Holloway's been trying to instill in these guys comes to the forefront now when you start to deal with Big East road games, particularly in what has one of the places which has historically been the hardest place for anybody to win, not in the last few years necessarily, but since the realignment down at Finneran Pavilion.
So my overall takeaways, first of all, the fact that they started 2 for 9 from the free throw line. I reffed a 5th and 6th grade game a few days before this, and the girls, granted, they're allowed to move up on the free throw line because, they're really not big. They were still making their free throws. Even the day before, I was reffing both of these schools were really small schools, and there weren't a lot of free throws, but each team made at least 50%, which Seton Hall didn't make 50% from the charity stripe. Rutgers didn't either, and part of that was because Ace Bailey And I forgot what the other guy was, but it might have been Bailey both times where he went 0 for 2 from the charity stripe. It might was Harper the other one that went 0 for 2 during the final minute.
I'd have to bring up the box score. They were horrific from the foul line. It's funny that Shaheen Holloway complained about Rutgers getting twice as many opportunities from the foul line, when in reality, if Rutgers hits the shot instead of getting to the foul line, he's losing that game by 10 points. So, it was they were doing Seton Hall a favor by sticking Rutgers on the foul line. We know what Seton Hall is on the foul line. We don't need to get that could in fact be a product of guys not working on it. And that's also a product of stuff we've talked before where, there are 3 or 4 guys who know how to shoot a basketball on this team. And unfortunately, there are 7 or 8 guys who don't know how to shoot a basketball on this team. So the fact that Seton Hall goes, 6 for 13 from the line?
Yeah.
That unfortunately, that has been the norm this season. And you can say, hey, you hit some of those fouls, but then the flip side of that, if Rutgers hits a bunch of their foul shots, Rutgers cruises in this game. So the foul shooting, I think, cancel each other out. I think it was just, again, you just tip your hat to 2 lottery guys who made enough plays when they had to. I mean, they put up 45 of Rutgers' 66 points. Mm-hmm. And Jordan Durkak had 9. So I think there were 10 guys who played for Rutgers. And that day, 7 of the guys who played for Rutgers on Saturday combined for 12 points. So the fact that you commented a little bit about this with Adam Zelenka last week when we previewed the game. At some you let the big players on another team get theirs, and you shut everyone down. Well, when you hold everyone else to 21 points, Seton Hall probably had as good a strategy as you could have in a game like this against Rutgers. They just needed Harper and Bailey to be colder a little bit longer so they could have held on to the 10-point lead in the second half.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with you. But I want to address the elephant in the room. I thought from an overall perspective, the fouls are one thing, but just little stuff that the officials were missing. I was watching at home. I'm like, what are we doing, guys? I mean, they were missing some obvious travels, and they were letting a lot of stuff go. But more importantly, they were inconsistent. Fouls that they were calling on Seton Hall, they weren't calling on the other end for Rutgers. They did get the foul call where Coleman got to go to the line for 2 shots for a chance to tie the game at 63. 1,000% the right call. I don't know what all those Rutgers fans were griping about. I mean, it was a clear foul. I mean, there was probably a foul on the first putback attempt, and then they got it on the second one. And then Coleman, I will give him credit where credit is due. He had the ice in his veins and made those 2 big free throws to even put them in a position to tie the game, potentially send it into overtime. I wish the defense on the last shot could have been a little bit better from Garway Dual, because I think he got turned around and he wasn't expecting Harper to take it up the right side of the court, considering he's a southpaw. But either way, even with the contest that he put up, which wasn't great, but it wasn't terrible, I will say, a 25 to 30 footer is still tough to make, and you got to give Dylan Harper the credit. I mean, like you said, he's a projected lottery pick for a reason, and projected lottery picks make shots like that when it matters most. So I'll tip my cap to Dylan Harper for making that shot. But Rutgers fans, they got to remember that it took Harper and Bailey and a 30-foot shot at the buzzer to put us away. And it was, so I want to know your thoughts also about what Shaheen Holloway said regarding, even though they lost, this is where he wants his team to be at in terms of the fight and the overall level of play that they're at going into Big East play. Because, I mean, in principle, I agree with him. Just unfortunately, it's not showing up in the win column.
Well, not yet. I mean, again, if you circle back to last week when they basically didn't show up for the first 10 minutes of the Oklahoma State game and put themselves in a 20-point hole against Oklahoma State. I mean, that was an example of the first 10 minutes. They didn't come out and give the type of effort that this team needs to make. I mean, again, you are so limited offensively that you have to go all out on defense, and you have to try to make the best of your opportunities on the offensive end, including hitting a few more foul shots, including hitting a couple more layups, including guys with open shots not being willing to pull the trigger. As great as Chauncey Jenkins has been this season, I think there are still times, for whatever reason, he still hesitates to take. He still has this nagging fear in the back of his head that a couple of bad shots are going to get him yanked from the game. And you can't have that. I'm afraid to fail, or I'm looking that whole I don't play to lose, I play to win attitude. I think that's coming around for certain people. I think Garway Duel has played a lot better over the past, let's say, few weeks once he got healthy again from his shoulder surgery. Coleman's really stepped up as the guy on this team. I think he's someone who you can hopefully will be at the point as Big East play goes where you can mark him down for at least 12 to 15 points, if not more. And then I thought Emmanuel Okorafor, who got benched because he really didn't hustle out of the gate against Oklahoma State, really stepped up on Saturday. 8 points, 10 rebounds. I think he gave Seton Hall the type of presence you were expecting when he transferred in from Louisville over the offseason. So there are some things which hopefully if you see them carry over, you are going to see some results as Big East play starts. So I think that's something. I think he's, we talked about this last week as well. Unfortunately, it took 3 months if you factor in when they actually started practicing on campus. It took 3 months for this team to figure out what its identity was and how to perform based upon that identity. So now you get into the 2 toughest months of the year coming up, starting of tonight's game with the 2.5 toughest months of the year. And hopefully you'll see, Seton Hall be competitive and probably steal their fair share of Big East wins if you see the type of effort we saw on Saturday.
So I got one more officiating gripe, and talk about guys that have played better as of late. One of those guys being Scotty Middleton, who really played well and scored well against Oklahoma State. He was a non-factor because he got into foul trouble, and the last foul, the foul that fouled him out of the game, that was soft. We're taught as officials a little secret: if you're gonna foul a guy out of the game, make sure it's a good one and that it's obvious and clear cut. That was not an obvious foul. That was, he's going for the ball. He didn't stick his hand too deep into the cookie jar. It's in the backcourt, for Christ's sake. And no, we're gonna foul him out right then and there. I'm watching at home. I'm like, really, guys? That's how you're gonna disqualify him from the game? And he's a naturally aggressive defender. He was aggressive there, but he wasn't aggressive enough that he fouled. I believe it was Dylan Harper that he fouled. And I'm thinking to myself, really? That's how you're going to foul Middleton out of the game? I mean, he had 5 points, but he's barely out there. So,
let's circle back on that just for a second. There was a point. Jaden Daly, who's at the game, had noticed that he didn't know who any of these officials were, in part because there were so many big games going. The Georgetown Syracuse game, the Xavier Cincinnati game. You had a bunch of other big games going on, and that the top referees were probably at games like Alabama Creighton or Illinois Tennessee or games like that. Plus, the Big Ten I think the Big Ten's got, nobody's confirmed this with me. My suspicion is that the Big Ten has arrangements with certain officials to give them sort of some, there are referees who will only do Big Ten games this year. I think they're probably getting paid a little more money. So, in college, it's talked about college football about a Big Ten squad of referees. Like if Notre Dame's going to Ohio State, you get Big Ten referees in that game. That that was not really a thing in basketball, but it might be now. So you're seeing Big Ten referees who are going to be who ref this game as if it was a Big Ten game, and for better or for worse, Big Ten games feature a lot of fouls being called. I
Yeah.
mean, if you remember Zach Edey last season, Zach Edey, there were games Zach Edey at Purdue lived on the foul line.
Yep.
So no surprise that there's let's say, what you would call a loose whistle, where the referees just blow the whistle, at will, and they don't really consider what the flow of the game is, or letting them play. I'm not surprised that that's sort of the mentality of a Big Ten refereeing crew, like the one that showed up at Jersey Mike's on Saturday.
Well, I mean, when you make a mistake like that, where you foul a guy out of a game on something weak like that just shows that they weren't like in your pregame as an official. You discuss these things. Like if we have a situation where a player on another team has racked up 4 fouls, if we're gonna foul him out of the game, we got to make sure that it's a clear cut foul and it's a good quote unquote foul where all 3 refs would be in agreement that, like, yeah, that's a foul, and it's not some ticky tack thing that's subject to debate. That was a debatable call. If he like hacked him on the arm as he was trying to like go for the ball, he got him like that. Like okay, but that's not what happened, and like that just shows a clear lack of preparation for that officiating crew. And honestly, Jane Daly, I love that you pointed out that he knew none of those 3 guys. They probably just were under the big lights, and they did not deliver. And I'm not even talking about from Seton Hall perspective. They were just not good at managing the game the whole time. But again, I'm over it. That loss stung, but we got to focus on Big East play, and that starts tonight at Villanova. The last time Seton Hall won at the Finn, it was February of 1994, which before 2020 was the last time Seton Hall won a road game at Villanova, which back then it was at the Wells Fargo Center. And this is the first time Seton Hall is playing in front of fans at the Finn on the road since MLK Day of 2017, which that was my junior year of college for context, which, oh my God, I feel old as hell, but that's beside the point. But Villanova, after a really shaky start, they've been playing a lot better lately, which included an upset over Cincinnati in the Finn. And they did win their game, I believe, at the Big Five Classic. So they avoided finishing in 6th in the Big Five Classic this year. Pat, what's your synopsis of Villanova and how they've been picking up the slack in the month of December as they enter Big East play tonight?
Well, of course, the guy everyone's going to be talking about is Eric Dixon. 5th-year graduate guy, has been one of the best power forwards in the Big East, if not college basketball. In fact, I think I saw that he's leading the country in scoring. That guy can beat you from 3. He can beat you inside. He can beat you in the mid-range. He can beat you on the foul line. The interesting thing is I basically Seton Hall's going to have to throw a lot of guys at him. Core 4 is going to get his shot. You've seen Tume is going to get his shot. Prince Aligbe is going to get his shot. I suspect Middleton's going to be throwing the mix. You might even see Aaron Arane take on Dixon you've got to give Dixon a whole bunch of looks. And the one thing Dixon does probably better than anybody in the country is the ball fake. He's someone he's a master of the ball fake. He makes it look like the shot's going up. He does it great. It's like if you've ever played Wii Sports basketball, and the way that when you're playing the higher level guys just have these. You play Wii Sports basketball, the higher level guys, and you're like, there's no way this computer should have a ball fake the way that that people don't have ball fakes like that. Well, guess what? Eric Dixon is level 1500 ball fake, to use that type of expression. So Dick Dixon's a guy who, people have had nightmares about him for years. He's the type of guy who could drop a 30 piece on you and, just sort of go from there. Uh, Another guy who's really stepped it up lately for Villanova is the transfer from Miami, Wugo Poplar. He's averaging about 13, 15 points a game. The theory in the early part of the season was that he wasn't hustling. In fact, Kyle Neptune benched him for, I forgot, I think it was the Penn game. I think he got benched before their game against Penn right after Thanksgiving. And then he came off the bench and scored 19 points in that game. So Poplar's finding his groove. He's another guy who can beat you inside and outside. Obviously doesn't have the strength or even the shooting consistency of Dixon, but he's someone if Seton Hall doesn't keep their eye on, he could put up a sneaky 20 points. And then the guy who's really finding his rhythm in the offense is something Villanova really hasn't had since Colin Gillespie graduated a few years ago, and that's their transfer from LaSalle, Jameer Brickus. Brickus is he's a short king, 5'11" guy, but the guy really has a sense of the Villanova offense and really Dixon and Poplar in good places where they can score the basketball. That's probably going to be more of Garway Duel's assignment, probably a little Chauncey Jenkins on him, probably a little Dylan Adewusu on him. It's really a matter of trying their best to disrupt him. But Brickus is such a good ball handler that getting turnovers on Brickus is going to be a challenge. And if Seton Hall has to get turnovers tonight to stay in the game with Villanova, that's going to be easier said than done. I think the way you beat Villanova, it's scary to say you have to speed things up a little bit on Villanova. You're going to have to use multiple defenses. You're going to have to use some press. You're going to have to use some zone. You're going to have to find a way to disrupt their offense. And then maybe on the offensive end, you've got to try to find a way to get in the middle. Now, Enoch Boye, the transfer from Fresno State, has done a fairly good job at rim protecting, but maybe the key is try your best to get in the lane. I hate to say try your best to get to the foul line because I don't want to see a lot of our guys at the foul line during the game, but I think it really comes down to, just trying to be a little more physical and a little more athletic against a Villanova team that isn't quite as good, and they don't have, typical of a lot of Villanova teams, they don't have a lot of depth. They usually go about 6 or 7 deep. They lost at least one big player because he couldn't get eligibility. I think they've had a couple of other guys injured during the season. So they have a fall off once you get past their 6th or 7th guy in the rotation. So if you can, maybe get some, it's going to be hard to get those calls because, Villanova is going to get a Villanova whistle when they're in the fin.
Yeah, I mean, if we're getting the Villanova team that we saw in November that lost to Virginia, and lost a couple other games where again they had no business losing, then Seton Hall, I'm like, yeah, they can definitely go into the fin and win. I remember after the Charleston Classic, we were thinking like, hey, yeah, given how Villanova's looked, we can realistically go into the fin and steal one. But given how the last couple weeks have gone, I'm not as much of a strong believer in it. But I will say, given how they played in Jersey Mike's, they can handle an environment like the fin. A guy like Chauncey Jenkins, I agree with you. Like, he's got to get over his timidity a little bit. I mean, he knows what he's capable of with scoring the rock. So, to me, he should have the green light, but obviously, like, have the green light without being reckless with it, which I feel like he hasn't been reckless with his shot taking. Dylan Adewusu, he's got to create havoc on defense like he has been known to do. I think most likely his assignment is going to be Poplar, and maybe you get someone a little more speedy to guard Brinkus. I mean, I see a lot in Brink is what you do. He's an incredible ball handler and he runs an offense incredibly well. And he does his job of, running it to get the ball to Eric Dixon and letting Eric do his thing. He's been so good the last 3 seasons now that clearly he's the focal point of the scouting report. Now the question is, if you're Seton Hall, do you just let Dixon do his thing and worry about everyone else, kind of like what you did with Bailey and Harper with Rutgers? I don't know. I feel like there's a multitude of ways you can go about it, including giving them different defensive looks on Dixon and just as a whole, applying pressure in the backcourt, as well as maybe sagging off into a zone, keeping up how they've been switching on every ball screen. Which I feel like they've done really well, with the exception of maybe 1 to 2 games this year. But my overall assessment,
as a non-serious point, how would you like to see Gus Yalden take on Eric Dixon?
oh, that
I
would be
mean,
something.
I look. I mean, on the one hand, Yalden is. I don't think Yalden is nobody's going to claim Yalden is the greatest athlete in the world.
Yeah.
But if you tell him your job is to just chase Eric Dixon all night, I mean, Yalden doesn't mind jumping out to he probably shouldn't as often as he does. On the other hand, you just tell him this is not going to happen, by the way. Maybe Yalden plays, maybe he doesn't. But you give a guy like Gus Yalden, you say your job is just to stick to Eric Dixon. Like the young kids get taught when they're playing man-to-man basketball, your job is to stick to your man.
Yeah.
You see the one kid on the other team who's scoring all the points, and you tell someone, if you're playing the man-to-man, your job is just to stick with this guy. If you tell Gus Yalden, your job is just to stick with Eric Dixon and do your best to make his life a nightmare. And I'm not saying that's what Holloway's going to do. I mean, that's probably not what he should do. But I'm just saying that if you have that mentality when you go after Eric Dixon of just saying, you know what, I'm just going to be in your face all night, and I'm going to try to make you as miserable as possible, which is something that other teams, like, for example, as much as Ryan Kalkbrenner has 3 defensive player of the years in a row for Creighton, who's one guy who kills him every time? It's Eric Dixon, because Kalkbrenner sits back 20 feet. Kalkbrenner doesn't want to go near the 3-point line, and Dixon just stands there all night and bombs 3 over the Creighton defense. So you just gotta make a commitment. You know what? If you put a hand in his face every night and he manages to hit enough shots to beat you, that's what Eric Dixon does to people. That is just the reality. Dixon almost beat Maryland single-handedly up in this game in Newark about a month ago. So tip your hat the way we did to Bailey and Harper and move on to Georgetown.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, I'm not expecting Seton Hall to win this game, but I think they are going to look more of the part where they're going to be competitive. Like Shah said, they're playing the way that he wants them to going into Big East play. And I think that I'd be mortified if they didn't come out and play that way against Villanova. I'd probably be even more mortified if they did that against Georgetown, especially if they do play like that against Nova, and then they go into the Georgetown game similarly to Monmouth. I'm not even trying to put Monmouth and Georgetown on the same level in terms of, the energy you need to play at. And but y'all get the gist of what I'm saying. But the Georgetown game, it's a Sunday night game at like 7:00. It's an ugly start time. But in the Big East home opener in the last game before Christmas, and they'll have a game 9 days later, New Year's Eve in Cincinnati against Xavier, which we'll touch on the next time in the next episode that we air. But with the Georgetown game, you and I were talking about this before. Georgetown is playing above expectations. They went on the road and beat Syracuse just an hour away from me at the JMA Dome, which is the first time Georgetown has won in that building since JT3 was the coach. Ewing never won in the Dome. JT3 in his final year before he got fired That was the last time the Hoyas won in the former Carrier Dome. Now, I mean, they sit at what, 9-2, and their losses are again, Notre Dame, and then they lost against West Virginia. I was the other one. I mean, what do you make of the Hoyas so far?
Well, there are two obvious stars that you have to keep an eye on for Georgetown. One is, of course, Jaden Epps. He's back. He's shooting whenever he wants to. He torched Syracuse for 27 points on Saturday. And that guy, if he gets on, Georgetown will beat anybody on their almost anybody on their schedule. Maybe not Connecticut, maybe not Marquette, but anybody else in the Big East. Epps is on, Georgetown's going to get more Big East wins than they got last season. And then, of course, there's the big man, the guy everyone's talking about, Thomas Sorber. 6'10", tremendous on the offensive end. He's given Georgetown the type of inside presence they haven't had in years. I think he's even better. He's definitely better than Qudus Wahab, who was the guy who they thought was going to be their big-time center a few years ago. People are putting him in the same sentence as Alonzo Mourning, Othello Harrington, and we know what those guys ended up doing when they got to the NBA. And people think Sorber is that type of talent. So in that sense, again, you got to Sorber, of course, doesn't quite have the outside game that Dixon has, although he has gone out and hit a few threes this season. I think, of course, what Georgetown's going to hope to do with Sorber is just drop him on the box and dare anybody from a team like Seton Hall to stop him, whether it's a core four, whether it's Aaron Aronay, whether it's Yalden, whoever it is. Sorber's proven he can beat some of the best bigger men he's been facing so far this season. So the other thing that Georgetown has this season that they didn't quite have last season was better point guard play. Malik Mack, transfer from Harvard, has really, when Ed Cooley gave him the keys to the offense, it took Mack a while to figure things out. But I think Mack is showing the type of player he was at Harvard that got a school like Georgetown interested in picking him up in the transfer portal. And the other thing he does, which Georgetown didn't do last season, is he makes sure that that everyone in the offense gets a share of the ball. This is not just going to be a situation like we've seen with Georgetown a lot last year, where it was the Jaden Epps show. This is going to be where they're going to spread the ball equally around to everybody else on the team. So you can't just key in on Epps, even though you have to keep an eye on Epps wherever he is on the court. So this Georgetown team is going to be a lot more challenging to deal with than Georgetown teams we've seen in the recent past.
I 1000% agree with you. I mean, this team only won twice in Big East play last year, both against DePaul. And we've seen that, well, DePaul has definitely grown, and we will see DePaul first game back after when the calendar turns to 2025. But focusing on this Georgetown team, Jaden Epps is still their top dog when it comes to scoring the rock. But when you add guys like Sorber, like Mack, and you're getting more production and supplemental scoring to make Epps' life a little easier and to not get as much attention drawn on him, that makes it a lot more difficult to scout if you're an opposing coach getting ready for the Hoyas. And Ed Cooley in year two, things have been going much better for him. I know they've had a relatively cupcake schedule because Notre Dame's okay. West Virginia on the road, doesn't matter their quality. DeVries is definitely helping the Mountaineers get a lot better. Coming over from Drake. But they did get a win at Syracuse, so that I think that does bode well. And we all know how important it is for Georgetown fans to get a win over the Orange, especially in the Dome. And again, it hasn't happened since 2017. Well, no, December 2016. So it's been 8 years. So they're playing with some momentum. They know how to win on the road in a difficult environment. Definitely not going to try to equate the Dome to the Rock. But now we know that Georgetown can win on the road against a power conference opponent. So, yeah, and the Big East is a power conference. I don't want to hear anyone tell me, oh, no, we know we don't have football, but basketball, we are a power conference. Damn it. I don't want to hear the slander. Anyways, um, keys for Seton Hall, players, or just as a team, what they need to do to win this game, or just in general, for them to at least split these first two conference games before the holiday, before Christmas, and then of course the New Year's Eve game in Cincy.
Well, I think again, you got to play the way that you've played at least in the last, let's say, 60 minutes of basketball. The second half of Oklahoma State and then Rutgers. The defense has to be as tight as it can be. You hold Rutgers to 66 points, and that's not a small accomplishment because that's a team that can go off. We saw them put 90 up against top 5 Alabama out in Las Vegas. So we know that the defense is, it may not be Wagner worthy 28 points, but you gotta make a defensive effort. Everyone has to take their assignment, and everyone's got to make. One thing Seton Hall sometimes gets in trouble with is leaving guys open on the three, particularly against teams that can move the ball. Villanova lately has shown tremendous ball movement. I watched their game against FDU last week. They had guys open for three all night. So if you play the way FDU, the Seton Hall's got to play better defense, at least in identifying open 3-point shooters against Villanova tonight. And then to a lesser extent Georgetown still has guys who can hit the three. Fs can hit the three. Micah Peavy can hit the three. You leave Mac open for a three. He can knock one down. So you don't want to get into that mentality of you overhelp when somebody has the ball, particularly when it's a guy like Dixon, because Dixon can find guys. Dixon's a good enough passer where he can find guys open for threes. So you got to make sure that you've got your head in the swivel against a team like Villanova. Georgetown, again, while on the one hand you would say sell out to stop Epps or sell out to stop Sorber, you obviously do that, and the other guy's going to beat you. So I think it's a matter of making sure. I mean, Epps is not the biggest guy in the world, so this is where like a Garway Duel or a Dylan Adewusu has to be able to show that he can handle him one-on-one. Wusu did a pretty good job last year against Epps in the 2 games Seton Hall played against Georgetown, for what it's worth. And then the question is, what do you do about Sorber? We can throw a lot of different bodies at Sorber, which might be a way to throw him off. On the other hand, you may have to give more help in the middle to stop him, given the fact that you go man to man against Sorber, you might be asking for him to light you up for 20-25 points.
Yeah, I do agree with a lot of the points you make. The one guy I will challenge, obviously in a good way. Prince Aligbe has been playing much better as of late. I think he's been much better, especially against Rutgers, at finishing at the rim and being strong with the ball on the glass, and then obviously when he's trying to go up and finish at the rim. So I think Aligbe, especially against a team like Georgetown, I know he's an undersized power forward at 6'7", but he's definitely got the muscle to go up against a guy like Eric Dixon, like a Thomas Sorber. I think they just got to defend the perimeter well. And I mean, all I want for Christmas is to make free throws, because these are the next 20 games. Those points are going to matter. They might not matter as much when you're playing a team the caliber of like a UConn or a Marquette, and to a lesser extent Creighton, but you got to make your free throws. I mean, I will die on this hill. Free throws, a large part of that is psychological. I mean, if you miss one, that's going to get in your head and stick with you for a while, unless you're kind of built different and just if you have a memory like a goldfish and then you shoot the next one, you make it. But it's all psychological. I mean, it all happens. It's not all psychological, but if you have a routine that you stick with regularly, and you just have the vision of like how you're gonna get it up, have making sure you're spotted on the floor right, hands on the ball that you need. Like, I mean, there's a whole book that Jim Lee, former Syracuse player, he wrote called 15 Feet for Free about the psychology of free throws. Like, it's worth a read. Um, which is weird because I'm not really a book reader, but I did read that book and I got a lot better at free throws. Like, I won an intramural free throw shooting championship, fun fact, when I was at Seton Hall during intramural basketball season. So not to brag or anything, but like I feel like that's, if I could ask for one thing for Christmas this year outside of a couple of material things like a new webcam or some new laptop where my camera quality doesn't look like this, like that would be what I want.
Can I just throw one quick thing out there? Last Sunday, they honored the great Dan Calandrillo, who was the first great Seton Hall Pirate in the Big East era. There was Matt Laughlin on his podcast, Pirates Talk, a couple of years ago, did a podcast with Calandrillo where basically Calandrillo was the guy who helped recruit Shaheen Holloway to Seton Hall 25 years ago. And people much older than me and much older than you, Tim, saw Calandrillo was a walking bucket, maybe one of the best shooters Seton Hall has ever had, and that includes Jeremy Hazel and Miles Powell. So, maybe it's a matter of we got to find a way to get some of these guys to have a session with Calandrillo and get Calandrillo to show them what a proper free throw shooting. It's the middle of December, and that's the type of thing that you should probably be thinking about in September and October. But at some point, get somebody in who can show somebody, because some of these guys just, as much as you say it's a psychological thing to hit a foul shot, there are some guys in this team who just have horrible shooting form. The guys who look like when they shoot a basketball, they've never shot a basketball before. And that's a product of get somebody in there to show them how to hold the ball properly, how to make the proper aim on the basket, and all that other stuff. And so I think it's part mechanical and part psychological. Again, that's the type of thing. I mean, Holloway tells you in press conference after press conference, we do all the right things. We shoot 100 foul shots a player at the end of every practice. But, again, maybe it's something where, are you really watching these guys and trying to figure out, what's going on as to why they can't hit foul shots? There's probably a little bit of a coaching. There's definitely a coaching thing with the foul shots in terms of not bringing in somebody who can show them how to hit the foul shots properly. And as you've said, getting them in the proper mindset to how to hit a foul shot. So, but, that foul shootings, again, it's a big part of the game, but I think there's some other things that you have to see from this team in terms of playing basic solid defense. And then, getting high percentage shots and not being as worried about shooting. What Chauncey Jenkins is a higher percentage shot from anywhere on the court than almost anybody else in this team, not named Isaiah Coleman. So, he's got to, when he's on the court, he's got to take his chances. I think that's part of the reason why he's not getting the amount of playing time that he was getting earlier in the season, because Holloway has to make him understand that you have to make your time on the court count.
Yeah, I'm 1000% in agreement with you, Pat. Like, when you go out there, make your minutes count. And with a guy like Chauncey, we've seen what he's capable of with scoring the rock. I mean, the game he had against VCU in Charleston stands out in my mind right away. I mean, he was making, and he wasn't afraid to let it go, because in order to be a high-level player, you got to think and play like one. And Chauncey has done that. I know that he was battling some like minor injury. That's why he was coming off the bench against Oklahoma State, came off the bench against Rutgers as well. But it looked like whatever injury that he had, it looked like it wasn't bothering him when he put one on that Rutgers player's head. I mean, that was one of the nastiest posters I've seen from a Seton Hall player in a very long time. I think the nastiest one I've seen since Desi yammed on Marcus McDuffie against Wichita State back in December of 2015. And oh my God, I just realized that game was 9 years ago Thursday. Oh my goodness gracious. I know that like you went to Seton Hall in the 90s, but I still feel so old realizing that like that was 9 years ago. Like, and I mean, we talked fondly about me personally. I talk fondly about those times, like how you talk about Terry DeHare and those teams from your heyday. It's just crazy to think that like it's been a whole decade since that group of Zeke and Dino and Desi, Ish and Angel and Mike Enzi all came into Seton Hall, um, and to see things like this, I know that this is the last thing I'm going to leave this on. Things are different now because you can't recruit players, I guess the old fashioned way, where everything's NIL driven, and if Isaiah and those guys were being recruited today, we would maybe get one or two of those six guys, not all six. Which to me, I'm going to go on my brief soapbox and call it at that. We've seen, I mean, Rutgers is able to get guys like Ace Bailey and Dylan Harper because they have the NIL money for it. I'm not going to say like we need to pour more NIL money. Like no, like the point I'm trying to make is with schools like in football specifically, or in the early days with Alabama and Texas A&M, where Nick Saban called out Jimbo Fisher for having this budget of like several tens of millions of dollars to get recruits or whatever it was. Unfortunately, Rutgers has that money and we don't. And bigger schools are allowed to hoard that kind of talent because they have more money to go out and get them. So, like in professional sports, the only way that this can be rationalized again, on top of the fact that the transfer portal we've seen in college football, it's open now. So like Marshall, their whole team left. They don't have enough players to play in the Independence Bowl against Army. Now I'm really going on a tangent. Oh God, help me now. But y'all get the point. I mean, even during the college basketball season, like during March Madness, guys were entering the transfer portal from even I think there may have been even schools that made the NIT. They were entering the transfer portal while the NIT was happening, and even when the NCAA tournament was happening. So you might have had a couple guys who did the same exact thing. And I mean, so until there's reform with the transfer portal and with recruiting, Seton Hall, unfortunately, is going to be kind of, behind everyone else and having to play catch up, unfortunately. So if I were to make a pitch to the NCAA, just please find a way to fix this problem where all these big schools can't just buy and hoard all of this talent. I know that we've seen instances like FDU beating Purdue in the tournament. We still see all these great upsets. That's what makes March Madness great. However, it just becomes so monotonous after a while and it becomes boring, especially, and we've seen it in college football where we just see the same teams every year getting all these recruits because they have all this NIL money and these other schools don't, unfortunately. And same goes with Seton Hall not having the kind of money to get a lot of the talent that is going to Rutgers or to other schools in the Big East because our pockets aren't as deep. And again, and like I said, if the Isaiah Whitehead class was being recruited today, we probably would have only gotten maybe a third of those six guys, unfortunately. So Seton Hall fans, unfortunately, I mean, unless there's reform, I think it's just something we got to get used to. And hopefully we saw him perform and get his team to play at an extremely high level in the face of that adversity. But eventually it catches up with you. And unfortunately, I think this is where we're at. But hopefully we can shake it off and at least win one game in the first two Big East games before we had that brief recess for Christmas. And then, of course, one last tune-up on the final day of 2024 in Cincinnati against Xavier. And to wrap this up, Pat, I speaking of that game, uh, want to share with the audience what your New Year's Eve plans are? Wink, wink.
Well, how we bring that up next week?
Mm.
We'll bring that up when we discuss these two. I'll leave it as a tease if anybody cares.
Okay. Okay. You know what? I think it's better to drag it out. Like let's give the readers
But
give our listeners and viewers a reason to tune in next week. Uh, that's gonna do it for this edition of Hoist the Colors. For Pat Madden, I'm Tim Best. Thanks for tuning in once again. Happy holidays or happy holidays. Of course, I had to make the plug because we're still the number one Christmas school in the country. That they can't take that away from us. So until next time, onward to Tonia. Take care, y'all.